Made with Spoken.
The Richard Cory Team. Catlin Taynor-Blunt. Crescent Region. Just after I turned 13, me and a few kids from the 8th and 9th zones signed a pact to kill ourselves at summer's end just before school started. That wasn't too unusual in itself. Kids had been forming what the newswags dubbed Richard Cory teams for decades, probably before the United States became the shattered states. Usually, it was just to do stupid stuff like see how many drugs they could take or how many people they could sleep with before they all took poison and drifted to the other side of the veil together. The idea was to live outrageously for a couple of glorious months, then die in each other's arms. For domers, being outrageous meant being decadent. Outsider teams did different stuff. Like a couple of summers before our team, there was a group of outsider graffiti artists who held a contest to see who could get their tag closest to the dome. Somehow, the winner managed to etch a stylish Eat the Rich with a laser pistol into one of the hydro farm windows just inside the dome before the kill deadline in late August. That was unprecedented, because until then, the dome had been completely graffiti-free, the tag still there too. I guess Dome Public Safety was so impressed with the feat. How the hell did they thwart our state-of-the-art security that they just left it alone? But our team wasn't going to do any of that stupid stuff. We were determined to be different. 1. We were composed of both domers and outsiders. 2. We weren't going to just pull a clever stunt or drown ourselves in pleasure. We were going to light up the Crescent for a purpose. We were going to change the world. Actually, there was only one domer on our team, and that was me. But had our team lasted long enough to snuff ourselves out like fireflies trapped in a jar, we would have been legendary. Because who would think Catlin Taynor-Blunt, the daughter of one of the wealthiest barons in the world, and barring the discovery of any bastard sons, his only heir, would engage in such nihilistic foolishness? It would have been almost as shocking as the death of the Richard Cory in the poem written almost 2.5 centuries ago. What was my reason for choosing death over life at the tender age of 13? I don't rightfully know. There were plenty of significant things going on at the time, but none of them seem all that traumatic to me now. First, Mom remarried. Joseph Blunt wasn't an evil stepdad or anything, but he was boring as hell. Plus, he already had a son of his own, and he and Mom doted on him and forgot I even existed. Occasionally, my real father, Everett Taynor, would come to visit, and he'd treat me like a queen. But there was a chill between him and my mother that could re-ice Antarctica. Mom never would explain what Dad had done to drive such a wedge between them. The gossip sites claimed Dad had beaucoup d'affairs, but that couldn't have been entirely it, because I knew for a fact Joseph Blunt had at least one mistress, a woman as blonde and fair as Mom was, raven-haired and dark. And that didn't seem to bother Mom one bit. Hell, for all I knew, she had some secret men on the side. After all, that's one of the things barons did. They collected a stable of lovers because they could. Mom and I had also moved to the Crescent from Greater Houston, but we had lived there for nearly 4 years before I joined the team, so I'd had plenty of time to adjust. It really wasn't too difficult. As long as I stayed inside Crescent Dome, which I did most of the time, life wasn't all that different. A dome is a dome is a dome. However, the tensions between domers and outsiders were much worse in the Crescent. The Crescent outside was way more toxic. The 10th zone, where no one officially lived anymore, was the first D6 zone on the continent. That meant totally unfit for human habitation, even with the best quality Haz suit. Of course, you wouldn't want to be caught dead wearing a high-end Haz suit anywhere near the deep outside, not unless you wanted one of the many gangs out there to kill you all over again. The poison in the land, air, and water bred political radicals as stubborn and hardy as crabgrass. Johnny Hannon, the infamous hacker and bomb maker, got his start in the Crescent. Damien X, another notorious hacker and revolutionary, was rumored to be based in region for a while. And unlike Greater Houston, not all the radicals were on the outside, because supposedly there were some domers who supported the outsiders, both philosophically and financially, on the sly. Everyone agreed that if the revolution were going to happen, it would begin in the Crescent. But I didn't find that scary. Oh no, it just made the Crescent all the more exciting. Maybe, in the end, it really was my parents' split that spawned my death wish. Such a cliché, but in this case, it was true. On the surface, the divorce seemed businesslike enough. Mom and Dad weren't obviously nasty to each other, nor did they talk trash about one another in front of me. If anything, they were a bit too polite. Still, I guess I was thankful for that. I knew plenty of kids who had it worse. But whenever Dad came to visit me after Mom and I moved, it was hell. There was always that chill I was telling you about. They didn't fight or anything, but they seemed to remind each other of something they'd rather forget. I'd ask Mom why they'd split up, and she'd get this queer look on her face like she'd seen a ghost. I'd ask Dad, and he'd clench his jaw and mumble, "Something happened." And that would be the end of that. I even tried pestering some of my aunts and uncles about it, but they would claim ignorance. The closest thing I got to a real answer was from Aunt Eileen. You got real sick, and somehow that changed everything. What deepened the mystery is that I had no personal recollection of the split. I mean, I knew it had happened, but for the life of me, I couldn't remember why. In fact, I had almost a whole year of my life missing. I was 7 and then I was 8. I lived in Greater Houston Dome, and then I found myself in the Crescent. And it's not like my memory was fuzzy either. Oh no. It was like someone had taken the video of my life and deleted a year. The only souvenir I had from that missing year was a recurring dream. And it wasn't even a whole dream. It was more like a recurring character. She was a dark, mannish-looking woman with short, bushy brown hair. Her brown eyes were uneven. One eye seemed alive while the other seemed dead. On her left cheek, just under that dead eye, she had 2 scars shaped like teardrops. She was always dressed in an ivory business suit that seemed a size too large and carried a serpent-shaped cane. Sometimes she appeared as a kind passerby in a crowd. Our eyes would catch, and she'd nod at me and smile slightly, like she was glad to see I was okay. In other dreams, she was a fierce goddess standing atop a sand dune hurling snakes of flame like thunderbolts. I vaguely remember drawing a picture of her once, figuring maybe if I got her outside of my head, she might stay out of my dreams. I showed the picture to Mom, and she immediately folded it up and hid it. I never saw the picture again, and the dead-eye woman in the ill-fitting ivory suit continued to make regular nocturnal visits. Once, not too long after I joined the Dome Youth Volunteer Corps in the Crescent, I signed up as soon as I could on my 10th birthday. The deep outside captain, another wayward baron's daughter by the name of Allison Flowers, took me to her friend's apartment in the upper 9th for a reading. Allison had taken a special interest in me, probably because my real father wasn't around all that much, and she felt sorry for me. Her father, Vincent Flowers, had passed away just before she finished high school. I don't remember exactly how the dead-eye woman came up in conversation, but Allison, Nightflower was her adopted outside name, was intrigued. "Your mom won't tell you anything about her?" she asked. I shrugged. "Nah, what can she tell me? The woman's in my dream. I don't even think she's real." "It all depends on what you mean by real. She could be some kind of messenger from beyond the veil," Allison speculated without batting an eye. "There are things that are real that can't be proven." That was yet another difference between the Crescent and Greater Houston. The Crescent was more haunted. Well, at least more people talked about it being haunted. Mom said they were just more superstitious in the Crescent. They'd had more than their share of tragedies and were willing to believe in any fool thing for comfort. Allison made me an offer. "I could take you to someone who can tell you about her. You just have to promise not to tell." "Why?" I asked warily. "He lives in the upper ninth, and I'm not supposed to take anyone that far out until they're 13. "Is he going to hurt me?" "No," Allison replied. "He's just going to read you, which means he'll hold your hand and then ask permission to see your dream." Allison's explanation of a reading kicked loose a memory from that missing year. Suddenly, I recalled lying in a hospital bed and a kindly priest with curly brown hair sitting on the edge of that bed, holding my hand. "Hey!" Allison called, snapping her fingers in my face. "Where'd you go?" "I was just thinking about something," I answered in a daze. "Have you been read before?" she asked. "Maybe. I don't know." "Well, it sounds like it might do you some good." "Well," we went back and forth for a while, but eventually she convinced me to go with her to be read. She took me to a tiny duplex in U9 West. A melodious male voice buzzed us in after Allison announced our arrival via the ancient intercom. We stepped through decon into what was the junkiest house I'd ever seen. There was all sorts of strange clutter in the living room, everything from random computer parts to jars of herbs. The whole place smelled of incense and stewing chili sauce. The house's lone tenant met us in the foyer. He was a tall, good-looking man dressed in tight black jeans and a black t-shirt. His thick, long brown hair hung past his waist. His skin was a tawny brown, and his eyes were a liquid light brown, almost amber. "Hey, Knight," he said to Allison, and gave her a lingering kiss on the mouth, which probably would have lingered longer if I hadn't been around. Then he knelt down and spoke to me. "Hello, Catlin," he said. "My name is Papa Z. Allison says you'd like a reading." I just stared at him. I didn't know what to say. "How come your house is so messy?" I finally asked. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Allison tense up, but Papa Z took my rude query in stride. "Because I live alone and my mind travels several places at once," he replied. "I know where everything is, though." He rose to his full height and started walking down the hall. "Come," he said, and then he led us into a room as neat as the living room was messy. There was an elaborate heart pierced with an arrow and dripping blood painted on the back wall. Against that wall was a low table covered with a creamy white cloth decorated with gold embroidery. On that table was an odd assortment of things: candy, a glass of something that looked like wine, a piece of rope tied in a knot, sweet incense burning in a golden tray. He invited us to sit on the floor with him, and when we had done so, he looked at me. "Has Allison explained everything to you?" he asked. I was still overwhelmed by the room. I knew it was an altar room of some sort, but it seemed much more holy than the altar rooms I'd seen in online movies. Whatever this guy was into, he was serious about it. as serious as the priest who said Mass every Sunday. "Explain what?" I asked back. "The reading. She says you're being followed by a woman with a dead eye." Somehow that description sounded much more sinister than the woman I had seen. Even when she was standing on the sand dune hurling snakes of flame, I don't think she meant me any harm. "She's not bad," I told Papa Z. He simply smiled. "I never said that she was. From what Allison has told me, it sounds like she's looking out for you. Still, she makes you uneasy. She never tells me who she is. Yet she knows who you are," said Papa Z, nodding. "It can be difficult when the Loa play games." "The who?" "The Loa," repeated Papa Z. "The gods, the saints, the angels." "Mostly," I said. "She feels like an angel, one of those super sneaky quiet ones that hide out until you need them." "Okay," Papa Z said, nodding again. "Is there anything else you can tell me about her? I think she's the reason my parents split up." "Is that what you would like to know?" I gulped. Suppose this strange man with the almost amber eyes could tell me for sure. What good would that knowledge do? "I just want to know if she's real," I finally said. "Okay," he said again. "Good enough. Take my hand and breathe with me." I held his hand. It felt warm, safe, and hauntingly familiar. I closed my eyes and followed his breath. A door opened, and suddenly I was standing in the shuttle port near Greater Houston. The Dead-Eye Woman's shuttle had just landed, and she was walking through my father's private arrival gate with one of his men carrying her bag. Somehow she caught me staring through the crowd, waiting in the main lobby, and I felt her smile again. "She is real," Papa Z's voice announced in my head, "and she is coming to the Crescent. And when she does, everything will change." And so I waited for the Dead-Eye Woman with the same anticipation that I waited for the light to pour through the windows on Christmas morning. I thought she had to be coming soon, and when she did, my life would take flight, and somehow I would regain the year I'd lost and everything I'd lost with it. I looked for her at the ferry ports, in the mist outside, and along the sidewalks inside the dome, but she was nowhere to be found. Mom met Joseph Blunt and married him. Dad kept up the emails and video chats, but visited less and less. And through my work with the DYVC, I witnessed the despair and anger in the outer zones growing as thick and heavy as the mist. Something had to give. You can only hold your breath for so long. If the Dead-Eye Woman wouldn't come to start the change, then I'd have to start it for her. So when a couple of my outsider friends decided to form a team of no return, I was right there with them. "But why, Kat?" one of them asked. "You have everything to live for. Us, we're going to die young anyway, so we might as well do something to make our deaths count." To which I said, people thought Richard Cory had everything too, but he didn't. Two things conspired to keep our team from completing our grim but righteous, well, at least we thought so, mission. One was Cal Lee. She was a monster hurricane that slammed into the Crescent, as well as several other places along the Gulf Coast, at the beginning of August. The second wasn't a thing at all, but a man named Dr. Lillian Ruby. I guess you could say Lillian Ruby was the reason Mom and I relocated to the Crescent. After my parents broke up for good, he could see my mother was floundering, so he offered her a job at his company, Ruby Biotech, as well as a small cottage in Crescent Dome's East Quadrant. Mom enthusiastically accepted his kindness and secretly hoped the move might lead to more. You see, she had a crush on Dr. Ruby because he was everything my father was not. Actually, change that to almost everything. Because Dr. Lillian was most definitely a baron, He was one of the few people on earth wealthier than my father. In fact, there were some years when he topped the list as the richest person in the world. But that's where the similarities stopped. While Dad was suave, debonair, and almost too handsome to be believed, Dr. Lillian was shy, awkward, and looked like a befuddled college professor. He was tall, thin as a rail, and had an unruly mop of salt and pepper hair that he sometimes tried to tame by tying some of it into a mini ponytail that just reached the base of his shirt collar. He actually wore glasses, which was odd because he could have easily afforded laser surgery or even new eyes. When he got really passionate about something, he had a thick Southern accent that made him sound like a hick from the backwoods, except I knew of no hick who could recite the entire genome of a silkworm from memory. Unlike most Crescent Barons, Dr. Lillian grew up in Region, and even more unusual, he hailed from the deep outside. He grew up somewhere out in the hinterlands, the huge, lifeless Superfund site which bordered the 10th zone. Of course, it wasn't lifeless when he lived there. It was only becoming that way. When Mom and I first moved to the Crescent, Dr. Lillian stopped by fairly regularly to check on my mother, and sometimes he cooked us dinner. Occasionally, he would stay late into the night, talking with Mom in the living room. On those nights, she would always drink just a little too much wine and giggle nervously like a schoolgirl on one of those corny online serials. Then one night, I guess Mom giggled a bit too hard, and Dr. Lillian didn't come around as much anymore. Mom was sad, and so was I. I thought he would have made a fine stepdad. Still, even though things didn't work out between him and my mother, he didn't completely drop out of my life. If he was in Region, I was free to go and visit him at his house in the 2nd zone. It was one of the few places I could go outside on my own that I didn't have to lie about. It was a wonderful house full of lush green plants that Dr. Ruby had grown from seeds stored in his company's archive. In the basement, there was an antique microscope and a wall full of shelves stocked with old glass slides. I used to spend hours looking at the bizarre eyes of houseflies and the scales of long extinct fish. I once asked him, "Why don't you live in the dome, Dr. Lillian?" Because he was certainly wealthy enough to own almost everything in it. Because I like to stay close to the land, he replied, no matter how degraded it's become. Staying close keeps me honest. I know how easy it is to forget. My mentor, Allison, thought highly of Dr. Ruby. In fact, he was the only person on the dome board she really liked. The Corps wouldn't exist without him, she once told me. You'd think it would have been easy to found the Corps, especially since my father was a board member. But Dad thought the idea was naive, misguided, and dangerous. The board debated the Corps for several hours and things got pretty nasty. At first, Dr. Ruby said nothing, but you could see he was actively engaged. Then suddenly, when it looked like the board was going to nix the idea forever, Dr. Ruby leaned back in his chair and quietly mused, "I think the Corps is a good idea." After that, everyone else quickly fell into line. "But why would they do that?" I asked, somewhat confused. "Because they're scared of him," Allison stated simply. "He's wealthy enough to buy the whole lot of them several times over, and he's got hometown cred. Everybody's afraid that one of these days he's going to show his fangs and pull rank. Kind of like how your real dad rules Greater Houston." I wasn't buying it. Mom said Dad ruled the Greater Houston board with an iron fist, and, like I told you before, Dr. Lillian was nothing like my dad. Anyway, not too long after I joined the team, I told Lillian Ruby that Me and a couple of kids from the Corps were having a friendly competition that summer. We wanted to see who could come up with the best idea to bring domers and outsiders together. Of course, I made no mention of my Richard Cory team, or that best idea had to be good enough to be my last. He would have blabbed to my mother in a heartbeat. My earnestness intrigued him. I'd mentioned nothing about life or death, but somehow he sensed this was more than the average do-good project to look good on a college application. "What have you thought of so far?" he asked. I shrugged. "I don't know, stupid stuff that's all been done before." "Like what?" "Like I was thinking about a Domer Outsider sports tournament. You know, something like the old Olympics, but just for the Crescent. Actually, that hasn't been done before." "I know," I said sadly, "but I don't do sports." Then I added, "And it would all be so temporary. Once the tournament was over, everybody would just go back to their own little worlds. Nothing would really change, and you know the tournament would have to be held in the dome. There are so many domers who won't go outside at all." He squeezed my shoulder affectionately. "Catlin, you can't change the world overnight." "I know," I whined, "but people on the outside are so sick of waiting." He nodded thoughtfully. "Yes," he said gravely, "we are." Dr. Ruby and my stepdad were both out of region on business when the first stirrings of what was then known as Tropical Depression 15 formed in the Atlantic. At first, no one was sure if it would grow into a named storm or not. For nearly a week and a half, all it did was churn in place and spit out a few random thunderbolts with no discernible purpose. But that year's hurricane season had been ominously quiet, and several meteorologists thought we were way overdue for a big one. Meanwhile, my team and I were busy coordinating a youth art exhibit for the 6th Zone Library. I wasn't much of an artist either, but art was far more interesting to me than sports. Plus, art had a way of sticking to the soul that sport didn't. Things weren't going exactly swimmingly, but at least they were going. My mentor, Allison, was definitely into it. Her Nightflower graffiti art was all over the tar pit wall at the edge of the 9th Zone, but even more importantly, her uptight ice blonde older sister, Etta, also actively supported it, which helped increase the Domer kid participation numbers. Parents trusted Etta. She ran her father's company well, and while she advocated for the outside, people didn't feel she'd gone overboard with her compassion. The fact the exhibit and reception was being held in the 6th Zone Library also helped our cause. The 6th Zone was far enough out to be considered the deep outside, which gave our planned event legitimacy in the eyes of outsiders. Yet the venue was safe enough to satisfy jittery Domer parents. They wouldn't have to walk a long ways through the noxious mist and wear out their has suits prematurely. All they'd have to do is disembark at the 6th Zone ferry stop, and they were practically there. The exhibit was generating a lot of buzz, even out of region. Some newswags even went as far as to say that it was a sign of hope that the Crescent, and by extension, the whole of the shattered states, might be able to move closer to justice without a whole lot of bloodshed and pain. Their children shall lead them. Well, I'm not sure if our exhibit would have done all that, but I'm sure it would have made some beautiful last memories before me and my team shot up enough blue sky and heroin to fade into the fabric of the universe. Tropical Depression 15 morphed into Tropical Storm Kali and started to drift northwest, just as jurors from the dome and outside were reviewing entries for the show. Kali was a difficult storm to track as she moved painfully slowly and erratically, throwing even the most sophisticated tracking software into conniptions. Where would she go? Would she hit the Yucatan and leave the shattered states alone? Or would she leisurely feast on the soupy warm waters of the Gulf and grow into a bloated, angry bitch? The board was anxious. If Cal Lee spent any time at all in the Gulf, she had the potential to become a record breaker, making landfall as a strong Category 4, or God forbid, a Category 5 hurricane. The board wasn't worried so much about the dome, since it was engineered to withstand almost anything, but a storm that brutal would flatten the outside, except for the fortified dwellings of the first and second zones, and the few fortified public buildings in the zones beyond. If people didn't evacuate early, and some were evacuating very early, folks along the Alabama coast started leaving in droves as soon as Cal Lee got her name. A storm of that magnitude could easily wipe out a third of the outside population, leaving a host of angry and desperate survivors behind. Tensions between the dome and the outer 10 were bad enough without Mother Nature, throwing a whole mess of wind, rain, lightning, and flying debris into the mix. The dome board started burning the midnight oil a little over a week and a half before Hurricane Kali hit the Gulf Coast. The main problem, at least according to my mentor Allison, was what to do with all the outsiders who wouldn't fit into the public shelters and couldn't muster the resources to leave region. Allison thought the dome should take in as many of these poor souls as possible, since the dome could support many more people than it actually housed. But others callously looked at Kali's imminent arrival as a chance to thin the herd, especially in the deeper zones. Their reasoning? Most political radicals came from the 8th and 9th zones, and it would be no big loss if a good number of them were washed out to sea. I'm not kidding. Allison told me a board member actually said that, and some years later, when I hacked into the board's server, I read those pre-Kali meeting transcripts and confirmed the quote for myself. Outside evacuations began in earnest 6 days before Kali's scheduled arrival, which put the exhibition on hold indefinitely. The 6th Zone Library, along with the school's 9th Zone Library and the 2 outside hospitals, became storm shelters crammed with cots, luggage, and frightened people. I managed to sneak outside once to the 6th Zone Library to visit the other members of my team. We stuffed ourselves into one of the few unused study rooms to discuss our plans. What should we do? I asked. The exhibit probably ain't gonna happen before our kill date, and we've done nothing to save the world. Lindy, a 7th grader from Lower 7th East, who was so cynical I thought of her as the oldest 12-year-old in the world, replied, I think we should off ourselves anyway, 'cause Lord knows if Kali lands here, there ain't gonna be much to save. I bought my blue sky and smack with me just in case they won't let us leave the shelter. Marianne, who was from the upper 9th, disagreed. No, Lindy, we're all supposed to go together or not at all. That's the rules. And it's real bad luck to break those kind of rules. Lindy crossed her arms and pouted. Fuck your rules, she spat. A couple of days after that rushed powwow in the library. There was a board meeting that changed everything. All the known public shelters on the outside were overflowing by then, but there were still a lot of leftover people, mostly from the 8th and 9th zones, with nowhere to go. Meanwhile, Cal Lee had ballooned into a monster, the likes of which no one had ever seen. If her outer bands so much as grazed the coast, she could decimate hundreds of miles of coastline. That's how huge and strong she was. Dr. Ruby had managed to make it back to the Crescent. My stepdad had tried to get home as well, but he was stranded in Alabama because shuttle flights along the Gulf Corridor were booked solid. And Mom had practically locked me in my room to keep me from sneaking out to the 6th Zone library where the rest of my team was. The seminal board meeting ran deep into the night, and Dr. Ruby stopped by our house on his way home. The sound of his voice over the intercom startled me. It had to be 3 o'clock in the morning, and since my mother had remarried, Dr. Ruby never showed up unannounced or alone. I could tell he was upset because he made no attempt to hide his accent. "Ajana," he implored, "I know it's late, but please." I was the one who got to the door first, because truth be told, I wasn't asleep. I'd been in bed watching Callie's excruciatingly slow advance on my tablet and texting my friends on the outside. "What color is the sky?" I asked Lindy. "It's been black as night for the past couple of days," she reported. "You can already hear the wind howling, even though the actual storm is still about 3 days away. Have you seen that one satellite video? God, that bitch is huge." I crammed my tablet under my pillow, ran down the stairs, and opened the door to see Dr. Ruby dressed in a gray polo shirt and jeans that both seemed too large for him. He looked shrunken, weak, and defeated, and I'd never seen him look like that before. I also noticed his eyes were red. I didn't know if that was simply due to fatigue or because he'd been crying. "Hey, Dr. Lillian," I said, forcing a smile and trying to sound upbeat because I knew in my gut his late-night visit was not a good omen. He looked down at me and his eyes suddenly brightened. "Catlin," he said, "you're just the person I want to see." That's when Mom padded up behind me in her robe and slippers. "Lillian," she asked, sounding both annoyed and slightly hopeful, "what brings you here at this hour?" He didn't reply right away. He took a seat in our living room and ran his fingers through his hair, which was wilder than usual. "As you know," he began, "the board met again today. All the outside shelters are full. Allison Flowers wants us to open up the dome to take in some of the desperate outsiders. But that idea was voted down." "Did you speak up for her?" I asked nervously, because I would have been sorely disappointed in him if he hadn't. He nodded. "Yes, I did, but it did no good. I think they want those people to die." I said, "Allison says the other folks on the board are scared of you." Mom gave me a quick slap on the shoulder. "Catlin," she scolded, "you know you don't just come out and say things like that." Dr. Ruby stood and reached for my mother's hand, just in case she planned to whack me again. "No, Ajana," he said gently. "What Kat says is true. The board is somewhat intimidated by me, and most of the time that works in my favor." He shook his head. "Not this time, though." "But why?" Mom asked. "Fear and callousness. They live in mortal fear of those on the outside standing up to speak with one voice. And if a significant number of outsiders are bound together by the shared hardship of surviving Kali, certain board members are afraid they will be unstoppable." Mom was outraged. "So they're hoping the hurricane will wipe them out? That's crazy." "Not really," Dr. Ruby said. "There are many on the board who know nothing of the outside and have no love for it." That's when I thought I heard Mom mumble, "It's happening all over again." I had no idea what she was talking about. There hadn't been a hurricane of that size with its eye trained on the Crescent in at least a century, and not even Dr. Ruby was that old. "Ajana," Dr. Ruby said quietly, "I want you to help me." "How?" Mom asked. "As you know, I maintain a large personal research facility under the hinterlands. There is enough room and resources for a couple hundred people down there. I want you to contact the 9th Zone Public Safety Authority and tell them where it is. Do not mention my name. Just tell them an anonymous donor has offered his shelter for the good of the people." He took a flash drive from his pocket and placed it in Mom's hand. "Here are the codes for entry. This must be done quickly. At most, you have a little over 48 hours, and I'd like to avoid a panic." Mom stuffed the drive into the pocket of her robe. "Are you certain about this, Lillian? That place has been your sanctuary for years." "I want to help as many as I can. I can't let the Crescent die." Mom looked at him with such affection and longing. I thought she would throw her arms around him and kiss him senseless like in the movies. "No," she said. "I don't imagine that you could." Then she ran to her office to get the ball rolling. That left me and Dr. Lillian in the living room. We stared at each other for a while, uncertain of what to say. I was only 13, but I understood the enormity of what had just transpired. By giving up his private shelter, he was finally pulling rank. Even without knowing whose shelter it was, folks on the outside would know the board was divided, and what was divided was vulnerable. Dr. Ruby announced, "I have a mission for you too, Catlin." "And what is that?" I asked excitedly. "The 6th and 9th Zone libraries have additional emergency space. I will give you the entry codes on one condition." My stomach twisted into a knot. "And what is that?" "You cannot commit suicide. You must promise me that you'll live." I couldn't believe my ears. I'd been so careful. I thought no one knew about my plans except my team. I hadn't even told Allison, and I told her almost everything. "How did you know?" "All the time I've known you, Catlin, you've never been quite happy. You've always seemed haunted to me, but recently that's gone away. You are at peace. I used to think it was planning the exhibit that allowed you to find your purpose, but then I noticed a small tattoo on your arm. Any pain can be endured when you've decided it has an end." I lowered my eyes in shame. As a symbol of our commitment to each other, everyone on my team had gotten a tiny tattoo on their right forearm of a stylized rose with the date 8/28 beneath it. Most of the time, my clothing hid the ink. Even Mom hadn't noticed it, but Dr. Ruby had. "How long have you known?" I asked. "I noticed the tattoo just before I left Region the last time, although it didn't occur to me what it meant until I was on the Pacific coast." "You were going to tell Mom," I said angrily. "Yes, Catlin," he admitted. "I was, because it would have been the right thing to do. You're just 13 years old. You do not have the wisdom to make those sort of life and death decisions. And I would have missed you." All my righteous anger dissipated. Dr. Lillian said he would miss me if I was gone, and that was all I needed to know. I am amazed at how often hope can hang on the simplest things. "Okay," I told him solemnly. "I will live." He gave me the flash drive with the codes. I turned to run up the stairs and get to work. "Where's your brother Jonas?" Dr. Ruby asked. "Asleep," I impatiently replied. "He can sleep through anything." Then it dawned on me Dr. Ruby might have an assignment for him too. "I can wake him up if you want." "No," Dr. Ruby said firmly. "Let him sleep while he can." I texted Lindy and told her about the codes and the extra space. At first, she didn't believe me. "There's been rumors of secret passageways and crap running under and through the Crescent for years," she wrote, "and nobody's found squat." "Humor me," I typed back. "I trust my source." So, Lindy grudgingly told one of the public safety officers on duty my delicious secret. He was initially doubtful, but he dutifully followed her to the locked set of double doors in the back of the history stacks and punched in the codes. Both he and Lindy were astounded when they saw what was behind those doors. A short flight of stairs leading to a cavernous-sized room lined with orderly rows of cots and 2 gigantic freestanding closets filled with protein powder, bottled water, and medical supplies. Lindy told me the room looked freshly stocked. The sheets on the cots had that newly washed smell, The protein powder and the medical supplies were new too. Someone, most likely several someones, had been down there recently, making sure everything was ready for the storm. Had Dr. Ruby set this quiet coup in motion even before he made it back to the Crescent? Just who gave you those codes? Lindy asked a couple hours later. An anonymous benefactor, I replied, but I had to promise I wouldn't kill myself to get them. You actually blabbed about our team. Who'd you tell? She asked. I swear I didn't tell anyone. He just noticed my tattoo. So, Anon is a he, which means it's not Allison Nightflower. Can't be your stepdad either 'cause he's stranded in Alabama. But it's gotta be somebody you know. I will never tell. I can't. I swore that I wouldn't. Well, hell, Cat. I can't off myself now. You've given me a mystery to solve. Callie finally made landfall 50 miles east of the Crescent, a little over 2 days later as a Category 5 storm. The day before the storm hit, my mentor, Allison, along with a few other rogue elements in the dome, opened the dome's northeast gate, hoping to save a few lives. The gesture, while well-meaning, went horribly wrong. A huge crowd rushed the gate, and 20 people were trampled to death in the onslaught. The event became known as the Dog Day Massacre since it occurred in August, and it got Allison kicked off the board and banned from the Dome for 2 years. With Allison gone, the Dome Youth Volunteer Corps fizzled. My team's exhibit never happened. The massacre also overshadowed Lillian Ruby's anonymous acts of kindness, even though they saved far more people than Allison's unauthorized opening of the gate killed. After the storm, I hung out at Dr. Ruby's when I could. But although he was in region more often, he hardly stayed in the second zone house anymore. I had no idea where he'd wandered off to. Mom said he was busy trying to make sure the outside truly recovered, but he was awfully quiet about it compared to some other board members, which was strange when you think about it, because I'm sure the board members who were the most ostentatious in their show of compassion were the ones who'd hoped the deep outside would die. 8/28 came and went. School started, and most of my team survived. The only one to go the blue sky/heroin route was Marianne, the girl who was so concerned about the rules. But Kylie's floods had taken her parents and her home, so I guess those rules were little comfort. Lindy and I remained friends, although we mostly communicated by text. Occasionally, I would sneak out and meet her at the 6th Zone Library. The deep outside was mostly a flooded wasteland, and the library was one of the few places that remained unscathed. After Kylie, Lindy shaved her head, probably because she decided it was stupid to waste precious clean drinking water to wash her hair. Also, it was cooler. Lindy had taken to wearing full gear indoors, except when she was sleeping. Once, about a month after the storm, I met Lindy in our favorite study room, which she had to reserve a few days in advance. When I arrived, Lindy was watching a news clip about Kylie's victims in Alabama. There was a woman being interviewed who had an unusual name, Maureen Watts, and I recognized her immediately. She was the woman with the dead eye. That's her, I whispered to Lindy. That's who? Lindy asked. You know, remember how I was telling you about this woman I dream about all the time? You think that's her? I nodded. She's a ghost charmer, Lindy explained, with no small amount of admiration. And a damn good one, too. She's been helping to find the missing people. She lost everything herself, though. Says she's moving to the Crescent soon. She's got an old friend out here, and he's got a house that's still standing. I said, Papa Z said that she was coming to the Crescent, and when she did, everything would change. Huh. Girl, you don't think Callie's rearranged things enough? Still, Papa Z, though, Sometimes my mother goes to see him and he's right on. Lindy playfully whacked my arm. Now hush, I want to hear this. I was quiet. The interviewer, a blandly attractive woman wearing too much makeup, was in the process of asking Miss Watts if, as someone who was psychically gifted, she thought Cowley had special cosmic significance. Ms. Watts scowled at first. She obviously thought the question was stupid. Listen, she began. I'm probably not like any other ghost charmer you know. I might have the gift, but I think most of that cosmic mystical stuff is bullshit. The camera closed in on her face, and I confirmed one eye was indeed dead. It wasn't clouded over or anything, but the pupil never changed size. There were 2 scars under that dead eye, just like in my dreams, shaped like teardrops. But yeah, Miss Watts continued, I will grant that Cowley is significant, and there's more to it than she was a big-ass hurricane named after the Hindi goddess of death. Sometimes an event is so unthinkably horrible that it actually blows a hole in time and everything becomes unsettled. That's what I feel like now. I have no clue what the future holds. Everything is malleable. It could all turn up roses or it could all go to shit. I just don't know. She smiled, then concluded. One thing's for certain, though. Everything will change. I sucked in my breath and Lindy looked at me. Huh, she said. Looks like Papa Z's right again.
Professional audiobooks in a click. Spoken.